Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 21st of May of 2026. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk once again about nuclear drills between the Republic of Belarus and the Russian Federation. The Belarusian Ministry of Defense has released footage of joint nuclear exercises with Russia taking place from May 19th to the 21st of May. The exercises involve over 64,000 military personnel, over 200 missile systems, 140 aircraft, 73 ships, and 13 submarines. The exercises included bombings with special munitions against a simulated enemy. Another important video was published by pro-Russian sources. Here we can see the same exercises but from the Russian side, and here we can see the Russian Ministry of Defense has released footage of nuclear forces exercises during which strategic missile systems were deployed on combat patrol roads and positions or in field positions. Another important thing that for the first time the Russians used new aircraft MiG-31I. As a part of the strategic nuclear forces drills, MiG-31I aircraft were deployed for the first time in history. The MiG-31I aviation complex, with the Dagger system and special nuclear warheads, along with other airborne carriers, is capable of shutting down entire continents. So the Russians shown us everything they have, and this weapon is very strong, as we can see. And telling the truth, these days I noted that the Russians has become much more confident in their actions. It seems that the Russians stopped being afraid of anything. The Russians are very confident, and we see and we can make this conclusion. These conclusions probably based on the statements and actions that the Russians have made since the beginning of this month, but more precisely not since the beginning of this month, but probably since the 12th of May of 2026. I would like to remind you that it seems that a turning point in the world history was the 12th of May of 2026 when the Russians published this video. And according to this video, on the 12th of May of 2026, Russia successfully tested the Sarmat missile system. Work on the Poseidon and Burevestnik systems is in the final stages, according to Putin. The president mentioned the possibility of arming the Oreshnik with nuclear warheads. So this is the Sarmat missile system, and the Sarmat's operational range could exceed 35,000 kilometers. And it seems that there is no system in the world that is able to bring this missile down. And it seems that, and I noted that right after the Russians published this video and this report, and right after the Russians managed to successfully test this missile, we see that the Russians have become much more confident in everything they're doing right now. And the Russians began doing such things that we have never seen since the beginning of the special military operation. The first and the most important thing is that the Russians, without being afraid of anything, began launching more and more drones in the direction of the Baltic states. Of course, we receive reports. This is my opinion, of course, and there are very high chances that my opinion doesn't have anything common with the reality, so that is why I would like to point your attention in advance. But if you ask my opinion, I believe that the drones that are flying over the territory of the Baltic states are the drones either were intercepted by Russians and launched or coordinated in the direction of the Baltic states, or were launched in the direction of the Baltic states at the beginning. And these days we receive lots of updates that more and more drones has flown into Latvia, Lithuania again and again, and an air raid alert has been issued once, another and another time. And the most important thing, why is this situation so important? We need to understand that if these drones are Russian drones, we need to understand that everybody understands this. The NATO countries, Mark Rutte, the President of the United States of America, Friedrich Merz, every single European political understand that these drones are Russian drones, but the problem is that the NATO countries and the European Union is not able to do anything with this situation. They can't do this. They can't say, because if they reveal this information that these drones are Russian drones, they need to do the next thing. They need to call for the 5th article of the NATO agreement of a NATO organization, but this will lead to a fight with Russians, and we know that after the Russians introduced the Sarmat system, more missiles, new missile systems, new aircrafts, we see that the European countries and the NATO countries are not ready for such a confrontation with the Russian Federation, and the only thing that the European countries are able to do with this situation is to force the Ukrainians to to send excuses for this situation. So this is the most important thing. Another important situation happened today, these days, also on the territory of Russia. For example, today we received a very interesting update, very interesting article that was published by pro-Russian sources. Let's discuss this in details. Russia will immediately respond to any Moldovan aggression against Russian citizens in Transnistria, stated Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zakharova. We are ready to use all means necessary to ensure security. So this is another action that is quite confident from the Russian side. And probably the most important and the most escalating situation took place in the area of the Black Sea. Today, pro-Russian sources published this video, and here we can see 2 Russian fighter jets repeatedly and dangerously intercepted a British reconnaissance plane over the Black Sea, the United Kingdom Ministry of Defense stated. We see that the Russians right now are not afraid of anything, and they're trying to show this to the whole world, that they're not afraid of anything, they're ready for everything, and furthermore, the Russians are ready even to open the second front line, even from the territory of the Republic of Belarus, and once again to attack in the direction of the city of Kiev. So, of course, let's wait and see how the things are going to develop, but it seems that the Russians know something, or they can do something that we still can't imagine or understand. Now let's move further and let's talk about the situation in Ukraine, and let's talk about the situation along the line of combat contact. And first let's talk about the Zaporizhzhia direction, where both the Russians and the Ukrainians attack each other. The Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours once again managed to improve their positions through the western Zaporizhzhia direction, and these are the changes on the ground between the dates. This is the end of the 20th of May and this is the end of the 21st of May of 2026. We reduced the territories under control of Russians, and we added additional territories under control of the armed forces of Ukraine and more territories as a gray zone, which means that Ukrainians continue improving their positions and the Ukrainians continue their counter-offensive operation with the purpose to restore control over this defense layer between the former river of Dnipro and the city of Orekhov. And as we can see, according to this configuration of the front line, the Ukrainians managed to complete this task. And once again, I would like to point your attention that, for example, this is the situation that you can see in front of your screens is the situation by the end of the 30th of April of 2026, and this is the moment when the Ukrainians launched their major Western Zaporizhzhia counter-offensive operation. And this is the situation by the end of the 21st of May of 2026, and as you can see, the Russians lose a lot of territories and the Russians were forced to fall back towards the settlement of Kamenskaya. Very difficult to understand what the Russians are planning to do next and what kind of resources the Ukrainians have in this area. Either the Ukrainians are ready to continue their counter-offensive operation further, or the settlement or the line between the settlements of Stepnogorsk and Novoyakovlivka was the task of Ukrainians and their main target. Maybe the Ukrainians are not planning to move further because they managed to create a buffer zone between the main Russia's positions and the city of Zaporizhzhia. And maybe this is exactly what the Ukrainians wanted. Another important area is the city of Orekhov, where the Ukrainians also started a buffer zone operation, and this time the Ukrainians counterattack in the area of the settlement of Mala Takmachka, and as a result of the Ukrainian counter-offensive operation, the armed forces of Ukraine managed to recapture almost completely the settlement of Novotakmachka and territories to the south and around the village. So these are the changes on the ground between the dates, and this is once again not the counter-offensive operation where Ukrainians, let's say, want to take on the complete control of the city of Tokmak. This is a buffer zone, a buffer counter-offensive operation. And the main task of this buffer counter-offensive operation is to take under control the gray zone and the territories to the south of Orekhov with the purpose to prepare themselves before the beginning of the major battle for the city of Zaporizhzhia. And as we can see, it seems that Ukrainians managed to take this gray zone under complete control. Meanwhile, the Russians intensify their bombardments of deep rear positions of the armed forces of Ukraine with aviation, with FABs. So the Russians are using everything they have with the purpose to destroy reserves, to destroy reinforcements, logistics, ammo depots, warehouses, and so on. And this activity is intensifying from the Russian side. We have discussed the western Zaporizhzhia and the southern Zaporizhzhia direction, where the Ukrainians managed to improve a buffer zone. And now let's talk about the eastern Zaporizhzhia direction. And it seems that as for the eastern Zaporizhzhia direction, the defenses of the armed forces of Ukraine are about to collapse completely. We have significant changes between the dates. This is the end of the 20th of May and this is the end of the 21st of May. According to information we have, the Russians have tightened the news around the settlement of Huiaipole, and it seems that the Russians created a cauldron without any chances for Ukrainians to escape this territory. It seems, and most likely in coming days, the Ukrainians would try to counterattack in this area with the purpose to untighten the news around the settlement of Huiaipole with the purpose to maintain a corridor for evacuation for the contingent of the armed forces of Ukraine on the territory of the settlement of Huiaipole. In coming days, very heavy clashes expected in this area. Another important territory is the settlement of Verkhnya Tersa. Today, for the first time since the beginning of the battle for this village, the territory was completely colored either as the gray zone or contested area or infiltrated area of the Russian troops, which means that currently the Ukrainians don't have any more strong control and strong position through the territory. Furthermore, the Russians continue advancing further in the western direction, and according to different sources, the Russians approached the settlements of Kopany, Dalinka, and Rivne, which means that the Russians began fighting for the next defense layer and the next defense belt. But as for the settlement of Verkhnya Tersa, the Russians are trying to create something like blockade from the west with the purpose not to allow the Ukrainians to bring additional forces in the direction of Verkhnya Tersa through the main logistic lines. The Russians try to control these lines and not allow the Ukrainians to stabilize the situation in this area. But due to this configuration of the front line, we believe that in coming days, both the Ministry of Defense, the Group of Forces East, will confirm information about complete control over the territory. Another important settlement is the settlement of Vozdvizhivka, and here we have almost the same situation. This is the end of the 20th and this is the end of the 21st of May of 2026. The Russians have almost completely infiltrated through the settlement of Vozdvizhivka. The Ukrainians, according to this configuration of the front line, have just strong control over the most northern parts of the settlement, and as you can see, according to this configuration, the Ukrainians are trying to stick as close as possible to the main evacuation lines that go from the northern parts of the settlement further in the northwestern direction towards the settlement of Lubitskaya. And also, according to this configuration, the front line, it seems that in coming days, the village of Vozdvizhivka would be also taken by Russians completely. And if these three villages collapse, then we can say that the eastern Zaporizhzhia front line collapsed completely. And from these positions, the Russians would be able to improve their positions immediately further in the western direction and take additional territories under complete control. And from this configuration, the front line, the battle for the city of Orekhov begins. A very interesting and strange situation is taking place in the Dnipropetrovsk-Dobropolye direction these days. We haven't received almost anything from this area. It seems that there is a pause before the storm, that something might happen in coming days, but as of now, no changes. Either the Russians regrouping or the Russians are trying to keep in a secret the current status of the front line. So let's wait and see, because it's impossible to hold a silence through the front line forever. The Kostiantynivka direction, the 21st of May of 2026, seems to be the first day when we have no changes since the beginning of the battle, or maybe since the beginning of April of 2026. No changes were recorded, just a lot of videos of how Russians were bombing positions of the armed forces of Ukraine through the entire Slaviansk-Konstantinovka agglomeration. And the most important detail is that the Russians began bombing the cities of Druzhkovka and Kramatorsk, and I would like to point to attention that since the beginning of the special military operation, the Russians have tried to save these cities as much as possible, and they have tried to convince Zelensky for hundreds of times to withdraw troops from this area, but Zelensky rejected every single Russian proposal, and now the Russians understand that they doesn't have any other option but to reduce these cities to ruins if they want to move further and deeper inside of the territory of Ukraine. The Kramatorsk direction, today we have lots of updates. As you can see, new changes underground. This is the situation by the end of the 20th of May, and this is the situation by the end of the 21st of May of 2026. And according to these changes, the Russians have improved their positions through the eastern part of the settlement of Malinovka. First, sabotage and reconnaissance groups entered the settlement. Furthermore, the Russians improved their positions through the eastern parts of the settlement of Tikhonovka, and the most important thing is that all these updates were published by pro-Ukrainian sources, and the Russians have captured this dense network of the fortifications along MO3 road. So the Russians are trying to improve their positions, and the most important thing is that the Russians are trying to improve their positions on the Ukrainian side of the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal. If it happens, if Russians are able to establish strong control over these territories, then the Russians most likely will continue offensive operation further in the direction of the city of Kramatorsk, with the purpose to cut the Slaviansk-Kramatorsk direction into at least 2 or even more pieces, and then it will be much more easier for Russians to handle with every single piece separately. As for the Slaviansk direction, we have lots of videos of how Russians were bombing positions of the armed forces of Ukraine and small changes to the west of the settlement of Kaliniki. So this is the situation, and as usually, the biggest number of updates of artillery strikes and FPV drone attacks are taking place and are coming right exactly from this area. As for the Liman direction, the Ukrainians continue their counterattacks, but the Ukrainians are doing the same thing in the Liman direction as they do in the Orekhov direction. They're trying to create a buffer zone around the city of Liman before the beginning of the major battle for the city. These are the changes on the ground between the dates. This is the end of the 21st, and this is the end of the 20th of May of 2026. The Ukrainians are trying to counterattack, to create a buffer zone with the purpose just to win some time before the major battle begins. As for the northern directions, the most important updates are coming from the northeastern parts of Kharkiv region. The Russians, according to the Ministry of Defense and the Group of Forces North, established complete control over the settlement of Shesterivka. Based on these reports, we have adjusted the map, but at the same time, we start receiving updates that the Ukrainians began counterattacks in the direction of the city of Volchansk with the purpose to cut this pocket Semyonovka Shesterivka pocket, the Ukrainians counterattacked from the forest in the direction of the settlement of Staritsa, and the Ukrainians began counterattacks in the direction of T-2104 road with the purpose to cut logistics for the contingent of the armed forces of Ukraine between the settlements of Verkhnya Pisarevka and Shesterivka. So there are very heavy clashes in this area as well. The sources stated that the Ukrainians were forced to use reinforcements and reserves from the Kupiansk direction with the purpose to stabilize the most northeastern part of Kharkiv region. And while the clashes, the biggest and the heaviest clashes, are taking place in the area of Bely-Kolodezh, the Russians continue advancing through the northeastern part of Kharkiv region with the purpose to establish complete control over the river of Volcha, to prepare strong positions on the Ukrainian side of the river, and then to begin the major northeastern Kharkiv offensive operation with the purpose to establish control between the Pechenegi water reservoir and the city of Kupiansk itself, and this is going to happen probably within 2026. We have covered most of the updates regarding the conflict on the territory of Ukraine. Just a few words about the situation in Cuba and in the Caribbean Sea. According to information we have today, the USS Nimitz aircraft carrier entered the Caribbean Sea, and it seems that the United States of America is preparing themselves before the beginning of another adventure in this area. I would like to remind you that the midterm elections will start only in autumn of 2026, which means that the United States of America still has lots of time to carry out a special operation with the purpose to achieve a victory. The President of the United States of America needs this victory with the purpose to win midterm elections. And most likely, if it happens, if the United States of America wins these midterm elections in autumn, during the autumn of 2026, then we are talking about the Republican Party. If Republican Party is able to win these elections, then most likely the United States of America will resume its military operation in the Middle East the next year at the beginning of 2027, but before this date most likely we won't see anything. The window of opportunities for the United States of America is about to close. They still have around a month or 2 months before to do anything through the Middle East. If they don't do this during the next 2 months, most likely they won't do anything till 2027, but obviously we'll see completely different Irans through the 2027. They will be able to rebuild everything. And by the way, today lots of pro-US sources stated, pro-American sources stated that the Iranians are repairing itself much faster than it was expected. So this is the situation in the Middle East and in Cuba. Let's wait and see what exactly the President of the United States of America is going to do with this. And that's it for today. The Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye-bye.